Okay. Well, thank you again so much. It really means a lot to me to be able to engage with folks in a more intimate setting about this book. I know that some of you have read it or and some of you have not. And I'm not this is for you. And we can approach this in any way you want. You can ask questions of me. I can give a little mini lecture on the book. I wrote this book. I completed this book over a year ago, and some of my thinking has already changed, and I'm working on a manuscript about that now. So this space is for you, but I think it would be wonderful if we could just have a go around, introduce ourselves, see who's in the room, just to develop some more comfortability. I can share first. So just so you know, Emily, Anna is a current student of mine, and Carrie is a former student of mine. So I know these two folks rather intimately. So I would love to, it's a comfortable space for me, and I want to welcome you into that space too, as somebody who's new to me, but I'm really happy to engage with. I'll start. My name is Amanda-Latz. A lot of folks call me Mandy, like my friends. Students will call me Dr. Latz or just Latz, and that's totally fine. I am an associate professor at Ball State University, which is in Muncie, Indiana, not too far, I think, from where you are. Kind of, 70. But I've been in this role. I'm entering year 13. And have a really strong passion for the community college sector, and in particular, how students and faculty experience that space. And I'm interested in highlighting those experiences to hopefully cultivate more empathic understandings of the sector so that we can build better policy, procedures, pedagogies, and to be honest, just try to tamp down a lot of the negative stigmas about the sector, and help a broader spectrum of folks understand what I feel is both the importance of the sector and its potential to support social justice and equity broadly within our society. So this book came out of a sabbatical that I had a couple of years ago, and I explained in another space that this study was very much sort of done in a crock pot. It took me a long time, and it was sort of slow cooked. Whereas some of the other work that I've done, for a journal article or something like that has unfolded in a more quicker pace. But I think that adds to some of the richness of the book and some of the approaches that I took to it. So I'll be quiet now, and maybe we can just go in the order of how I see y'all in your rectangles. So Anna, future Dr. Peace, we'll go to Carrie, and then we'll go to Dr. Rhodesiler, and then Emily, or it's Dr. Kramer. Am I correct? Okay.
Yeah, yes, but you can call me Emily.
Okay. Well, that sounds good. Thank you. Anna, you want to go ahead and introduce whatever you feel is relevant?
Yeah, my name's Anna Peace. I'm in the EDD program in higher education at Ball State. I'm also an academic advisor there, and taking a sick day. So I'm a bit under the weather, but I super love Dr. Latz, and just really appreciate this space to hear more about her research.
I'm Carrie Rhodesiler. I just finished my degree in July, so I like to tell people I'm in recovery right now. So it'll be about, I'm taking a year to just kind of, sort myself out, the new normal, figure out what that means. So I teach here at Indiana Tech. I'm an assistant professor of English. So yeah, I'm about to run off to class, so I want to apologize. Class starts at 10, so I'm probably going to cut out about 9:50. My apologies for that.
Well, my name's Emily Kramer, and I am a postdoc at The Ohio State University, so not too far away. And I saw, so Mandy, I think I connected with you on LinkedIn. I don't remember if it was through, I saw something on like the CSP Talk listserv or something, but I've been trying to, and failing at it, connect with people like on LinkedIn or on X or things like that, just that are outside of, the Ohio State, and my PhD is from Bowling Green State University. And I was intrigued by this because, one, I was in academic advising and a clinical mental health counselor for college students for about 16 years before I went back for my PhD. And my dissertation was looking at the future college enrollment behaviors of students from a rural high school, and the majority of them ended up going into community college. And so this really sparked my interest. I have yet to publish anything for my dissertation, even though my dissertation advisor has poked me multiple times. But as you feel, Carrie, it's, there's a recovery time span. And then also I'm managing a mixed methods research study at Ohio State that looks at the impact of college on students at community colleges. So it's not like I have a lot of time spent that I should go back and get something for my dissertation. I have a pending thing, but so the topic was really interesting. And for me, we're not too far away, so I was like, this could be a good topic. And I don't have the book yet. I want to pre-order the Kindle copy of it, but I'm like, this would be a good way to just hear a little bit about your work and your process. So I'm excited to dialogue with you.
Awesome. And let me just say, Emily, I'm thrilled that you're here. It's awesome to connect. And this doesn't have to be the one and only time that we do connect. We can, whenever you would like, I'd be happy to mix it up with you and chat. So that said, and knowing that Carrie has like 10 minutes, I thought maybe we could start just focused on you, Carrie. If there's anything that you want to throw out there to discuss or ask questions about. I don't know if you had the chance to get the book or read the book, but would love to just kind of start with you so we can prioritize your time.
No, I do not have the book. I was supposed to, my fault. It is on the way, it's somewhere. So it'll be here soon. I'm interested, my dissertation focused on community college, specifically the English classroom. But honestly, I just wanted to hear about this research because I don't think I've chatted with you a lot about it. So I'm not looking for anything in particular, just everything in general, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm more than happy to kind of give a little book talk and just share with y'all, and then maybe that would generate some more conversations. Does that sound okay, Carrie, that we start there? So let me kind of take it from the beginning. So the data that informs this book, the book is based on a study, and it's also derived from the study that I did, the literature that I engaged with as a necessary part of that study, but also it's informed by some of the experiences that I had as an adjunct faculty member at a community college while I was pursuing my doctoral degree. And that was between the fall of 2006 to the spring of 2011. So 5 years, and that was the entire time that I was doing my doctoral dissertation. So this particular study I was inspired to do this work after two things happened. One, in 2015, there was a significant mass shooting at Umpqua Community College in Oregon, where several individuals were killed. And I think that event really brought more attention to the community college sector. And it also brought some attention to what supports are in place for students, who may have some mental health concerns. Now, in the book, I absolutely say that we cannot conflate violence and mental health. That's not wherever there are groups of people, there's potential for violence, right? And we can't sort of demonize students who may have some mental health challenges. But I think what that incident did was it brought this to the forefront of people's minds. This was several years after the incident at Virginia Tech, And it was the most significant thing that had happened like that at a community college. So just sort of a historical pinpoint. That was 2015. And then in 2016, the Hope Center came out with a report that indicated that 50% of all community college students across the country, kind of a representative sample, were reporting screened positive for some kind of mental health concern. And at the time, that was, at the time, sort of the four-year institution number was about a third. And so this what that report did in my mind was saying, oh wow, this corroborates my experience, and this is an avenue of research that's necessary because we need to know more if we are going to continue supporting students to the best of our ability, and remove barriers that they may be facing in achieving their educational goals. This is something that really needs attention. And, I think what I also try to do in the book is say, listen, we really need to embrace this idea that everyone has mental health. And just like physical health, that's going to be good sometimes. We're going to feel healthy sometimes, and sometimes we're not. And, focus on sort of normalizing mental health concerns and issues, and thinking about that in a number of ways. When we say mental health concerns or issues, we're not always talking about certain diagnoses or forms of that. It's really a broad continuum of things that impede students' abilities to persist. So those two things were kind of the impetus. And then I said, okay, I want to carve out some time to be able to do this work. And so I applied for and was so privileged to be able to have a sabbatical. And I built a study around my instinct / engagement with the literature that says that faculty on community college campuses know students best, or know students the most, and maybe not the best, but the most. And the rationale for that was, I think a community college student could navigate a community college with sort of only interfacing with faculty, whereas that could happen at a four-year institution, but for community college students, really their faculty are the institution. That's something that has come up in some other research that I've done, and just something that I've seen. We know, a community college student will interface with a faculty member. Like, that is kind of a guarantee, even if it's just receiving an email from them, or being in the same LMS space. Whereas there's no guarantee that that student will actually meet with an advisor, will actually go to career development services, will actually visit a basic needs hub or a food pantry, etc. So what I wanted to do was talk to faculty about their experiences and their perceptions of students who may or may not have some mental health challenges. So I worked with a particular institution. So the study involves participants from one institution. And I conducted interviews with 22 faculty at one institution with multiple campuses. So all of these interviews were done in the spring of 2017. They were all done in person, and they were quite intense. And I really learned a lot about stamina and emotional energy as it relates to a study like this. I was doing multiple interviews a day, some on different campus locations. And after 2 weeks of doing that, I actually got sick. So I had to kind of take a pause and then go back later. And it was just really intense. Like, I think I was exhausted, and then kind of my immune system broke down a little bit. But it felt, I originally conceptualized the study as a constructivist grounded theory approach because I wanted to build theory. But because of a sequence of events, in order to write this book, I shifted away from that into a reflexive thematic analysis approach, which I thought would generate findings more accessible to a broader audience by way of writing a book. It's you do things differently when you're writing a book versus writing a journal article. And when I returned back after the sabbatical, I entered into an academic leadership position and didn't have as much time as I thought I was going to have to work on the data. So long story short, within the book, I talk about the faculty, and I really do a lot of work to set the contextual stage. So I talk about these faculty and some of their pedagogical approaches, their sort of onto-epistemological pedagogical orientations, how they got into their positions, et cetera. And then I go into sort of the findings of the study. And so I do a lot of pre-work in the book and then move into, the findings in part 3. So just a quick snapshot of 4 findings from the work. The first would be, and Carrie, this is going to sound familiar to you, but these faculty, only 3 of them were identified as men, the rest identified as women, and they were all white, which I kind of unpack that a little bit in the book. This is sort of unsurprising considering the demography of community college faculty, but I sort of unpack what that means for how we need to consider the findings going forward. Of course, ideally, our faculty demography would mirror our student demography. And, we still have equity work to do to that end. But regardless, kind of is what it is. So one of the things that I note is that these faculty are doing copious amounts of emotional labor. And I argue that in order to even recognize or be cognizant of students' mental health, you have to do some emotional labor to even, okay, Carrie, thank you so much. We'll see. Well, maybe we'll talk about this more again. Have a good class, okay?
Thanks, bye.
Of course, of course. So I talk about how these faculty, I think in order to even have a perception or an experience with students' mental health, are doing some emotional labor. And that can include things like, I bring it really to the basic, like knowing students' names, thinking to ask students, how are they doing? You have to do some emotional labor before you can even notice whether a student might be exhibiting some behaviors that aren't similar to what they exhibited before. So I talk a lot about the emotional labor that these folks have done, and give some really, I think, rich examples. The next finding that I discuss is this idea that we need to reject the monolith, or reject monolithic thinking as it relates to students who may or may not have some mental health concerns. So through this, because I was doing grounded theory, constructivist grounded theory at the time, I sort of member checked as I went in terms of, here's a typology that I think I'm seeing. Do you agree with this? And it's sort of a, I give a lot of, take this with a grain of salt type of prefacing. We don't want to typecast students, or, like typologies can be problematic and harmful. So, but at the same time, I think we do as human beings want mental models. So what was coming through in the data was that faculty sort of saw students who may or may not have mental health issues as sort of a 5-type spectrum. On the one hand, you have students who are exhibiting some red flags, but may or may not have some kind of diagnosis or would screen positive for a mental health concern. They're not disclosing, but you have concern about them. Then we have students who have some sort of diagnosis or concern, and then this may be a diagnosis that they receive from a healthcare professional or something that they just have established about themselves. So they may have this, and then they disclose this. And let me just make sure, I'm going to make sure I'm not misspeaking, and I'm going to go into the book so I make sure that I have this right. Pardon me for 1 second. Okay. So again, you have these students on the one hand who, do not disclose, may or may not have an issue or a diagnosis, but for some reason you have a concern. Then we have students who do have an issue or a diagnosis and disclose, and that disclosure can come in a variety of ways. Some students just sort of announcing this at the beginning of the very first class, and then some students may be writing this in a paper or having a conversation with the faculty in an office hour and disclosing. Then we have faculty describe students that are having sort of a situational struggle. They may be navigating a life event that is causing them stress, anxiety, maybe some depression that's stemming from grief. Maybe there was a loss of a family member. Maybe there was a house fire. Maybe they are caring for a sick child or a sick partner, or doing some elder care. So this is sort of like students experience a life event that is situationally bound, but still they're experiencing this as a class is going through and may need some support. Then we had another interesting category that faculty kind of framed as students who may or may not have a diagnosis, but are relying on either prescribed or not prescribed medication to help them cope. So a lot of faculty, not a lot, but some of the faculty mentioned that they had some students who they felt were using medication to manage, whereas if these students had more access to learning about coping skills, that could be kind of treated better. They were talking about a student going to their general practitioner saying, I'm having a lot of anxiety and stress, getting access to medication and then using that medication, for example, ahead of a test or a stressful event, of course, presentation. And then in later interviews, this was sort of framed as maybe something that might have to do with socioeconomic status or varying kinds of privilege, but it's complicated, right? So if students don't have a lot of time and students don't have a lot of resources, going to therapy requires time and money, and that's often where you build those coping skills. So we could frame this sort of as a rational choice. Okay, these students do not have a lot of time. They're seeing their GP, or, I don't know about y'all, but I'm seeing so many commercials about hims and hers, and you can, go in, So I'm thinking, this is a really interesting, complex thing. We might have some varying levels of understanding among faculty. But in the nursing program, for example, there was a concern about students' reliance on psychotropic meds versus coping mechanisms. But then when I would talk to Dev Ed faculty, they're saying, that is not a thing that my students are doing, and they are really having a hard time. And so that was a complicated thing to kind of unpack and think about. And then the fifth sort of category was students whose behavior was just so distressing that they could not continue in the institution because of risks of safety. And this was a very small portion, but some of the faculty had stories about, managing situations. And, this is a student who may or may not have had a mental health issue or concern, but just the behavior was so distressing that it was making the environment feel unsafe for faculty and other students, and that student could not continue. So, this monolithic thinking, I try to dismantle. Not all students are the same, and this is a really complex set of things that we have to think about. The third finding was related to navigating systems and structures to support students. So there was a lot of conversation about referral to counseling. This particular institution at the time did have counselors who were trained in mental health and had the appropriate credentials and licensure to be able to do that. But they were also doing academic advising and career education counseling. So navigating that process was frustrating in a number of ways, particularly related to feedback loops not being closed, which has to do with privacy concerns, et cetera. But that was a concern for faculty, because a lot of them were like, I made this referral and then I have no idea what happened, and the students continuing to come to my class, and I just, what do I do? And then there was also some concern about making reports to the behavioral intervention team or doing bit reporting, because there was this idea that there's this cultural perception on campus that it was a punitive body. That, in other words, if a student got reported to the bit, this was going to be on their permanent record. It could harm them in the future. And it was interesting because from what I could understand from the interviews, kind of everything went through the bit reporting, including plagiarism. And the idea was that we need to kind of bifurcate or differentiate our reporting so that, if we just want to say, hey, can somebody check up on this student, that happens. And I think, based on the evolution of technology between the time that I did the study and now, we have a lot more mechanisms in place on campuses to help with this kind of reporting. But at the time and on that campus, it needed to be, it was a concern. And, the recommendation that I built with that was to really be intentional about how that works. And then the fourth finding, which is chapter 9 in the book, is, I call it making it work. And these were recommendations that faculty had for like how they would mentor a new faculty person who was working with students who may or may not have mental health concerns, and just things like listening to students, being a student of students, being thoughtful about the kinds of experiences that you're asking your students to have and the ways that could potentially affect them. If you are asking students to write essays about, their past, or if you are having students go into hospitals for clinical rounds where they might see some really traumatic things, what supports are in place for them. But it was really just about sort of humanizing the classroom, thinking, yes, you teach respiratory therapy or you teach art history, but actually you're teaching students, like you're working with people, and you're working with them on art history or paralegal studies or what have you. And then in terms of the last section of the book, I give a lot of recommendations that are sort of grounded in the findings. And, maybe I'm not going to talk about that in depth, but one of the things that I've since been thinking about and writing about after completing the book is I have a chapter coming out in one of the new directions for community college volumes about what faculty can do to support student mental health or students who are experiencing some mental health concerns. And it's sort of a more sophisticated, it's kind of an extension of the recommendations in the book. And the three things that I focus on in that paper, which, how the academic publishing cycle happens, it'll take a while for this to kind of be published, but I talk about how referral is a huge part of the faculty role in this. But I talk about things that we can do beyond referral, and there are three of them, and this is just sort of a sampling. The first one would be leveraging any data that the institution has related to this topic. Now, it's kind of like we have to have the data before we do that. And that's one of the things I talk about in the book. Like, you have to know your students in order to act in ways that are appropriate to that will actually help them. So, for example, in the book, I talk about, how can we tap into some of the entities out there that are doing screens that have, nationally normed data, ask them to come in and do an assessment to see sort of where we are, how we compare to other institutions, and then disaggregate those data so we can understand, like, okay, if our students who are in the nursing program are experiencing more stress than everybody else, or if all of our students in the allied health areas are experiencing more anxiety and perfectionist tendencies, what can we do there? Or if all of our if the vast majority of our students in Dev Ed are having these kind of things happening, or if our students with any number of marginalized or minoritized identities are having these kinds of issues. So doing this in a way that we can collect a lot of data to be able to look at it from an equity perspective, I think is really important. But you have to have that in order for faculty to act on those data. And I think we just need to be more transparent with faculty about the student data that we have, because knowledge is power and knowledge is helpful in how folks approach their classrooms and pedagogies. So that's the first thing that I talk about in this new paper. The second thing I talk about is using trauma-informed approaches. And this is, something that we're seeing a lot more literature on because of the pandemic, which, we haven't even talked about how that's really exacerbated mental health concerns. But, it's interesting because trauma-informed pedagogies have been around for a while. And I would say since, I think some of the major writing on this was in the early 2000s, particularly a book called Too Scared to Learn, which is brilliant. But anyways, so it's like before the pandemic, we already knew that a huge proportion of community college students were coming in with trauma histories. And I think because of the pandemic, it's ubiquitous now, I think. But some examples of what I kind of think trauma-informed pedagogy is just good pedagogy, but there are sort of 8 components of this that I write about in the chapter. Work to ensure your students feel safe, foster trustworthiness, facilitate peer support and mutual self-help. I think there's ways that we can think about mutual aid as being part of our pedagogical repertoire. But anyways, I digress. Be conscious of and distribute power, encourage agency, voice, and choice. Encourage students to learn about learning, so the biology of it, and engaging them with metacognition. Emphasize the importance of having a purpose as it relates to your education, and leveraging community cultural wealth, and understand how trauma and intersectionality can operate together in the learning space. So coming at this from an asset perspective, but also understanding how folks with minoritized and marginalized identities can be sort of the oppression can be compounding, and what we can do to sort of counteract that in our learning spaces. So trauma-informed pedagogies is number 2. And then the last thing that I talk about is deploying micro-counseling approaches or micro-counseling skills. And this is just as simple as listening and using kind of basic interpersonal communication skills to have conversations with students. I think that we, in sort of the litigious, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I think a lot of faculty and institutions are really worried about getting sued because, and faculty are like, well, I don't have a counseling, I'm not credentialed to do this. Well, you don't have to have a credential to listen. And sometimes that can just really go a long way. Listening and holding space for students does not mean you're deploying psychotherapy. Like you're just, and from there you can help the student get access to the resources that you need. And of course, there needs to be boundaries and those need to be communicated. But, I don't think it's, and there's all kinds of, we have to think about things like compassion fatigue and secondary trauma and burnout and our own self and community care. But if we can listen and hold space for students, I think that we need to do that. So okay, I just talked for a very long time, so I'm going to be quiet and just see what y'all think, or if you have questions based on that telling.
Dr. Lath, when you were in the field interviewing, can you kind of talk about that, the sensitive nature of the topic and how you got participants and then built that trust to have them be able to share those stories?
Yeah, so one of the strategies that I used was to try to build a relationship with the people at the institution so they could sort of like vouch for me. If I remember correctly, the recruitment email was actually sent out by a person on campus who had done some oversight of the counseling that was happening at that campus. And I had, done some pre-work to build a relationship with the institution's president. And that person referred me to this individual. So I kind of had a little bit of institutional clout, or, I was not an unknown entity. And it was amazing because I couldn't believe how many people wanted to participate. I did not plan to interview that many people. My IRB package did not include that many people, but I made the decision to do all the interviews because what it said to me was these people would like to be heard, and I'm going to do that. The other thing that I think was helpful, Anna, was that I was an insider to the population. We could have a conversation that I could empathize because I had that experience. I was a community college faculty member, and I understood intimately some of the things that they were saying. I also think that, I built an interview protocol that gave folks decision-making power around what they wanted to share and what they didn't. So, I used questions like, how prevalent do you think mental health concerns are on your campus? And just let them go. And some of them gave a percentage, some of them, didn't. I asked questions like, can you tell me a student success story that you're really proud of? Can you share with me sort of the steps that you would take if you noticed that something was going on with a student that was sort of a red flag for you or gave you an unsettled gut feeling? And it was very open-ended. I mean, we used a protocol and I stuck to that, but it was open-ended. So if we wanted to go down a path, we could. I think that, let's also consider the time that I did these interviews. I did these interviews right after the Trump inauguration. And that was a thing. I had one faculty member talk about, a trans student who just disappeared, and they were really concerned. And, in a lot of the tellings, the faculty became emotional. And I don't necessarily think that I became emotional during the interviews, but like I I just let it go. Like it wasn't, I tried to be affirming and comforting and normalize that, because this is hard. I mean, these people care about their students and have gone through a lot of, for those who have if you teach for a long time, you're going to see students go through a lot of things, and that's hard. It's just making space for that. There were some instances where faculty were like, I too struggle with mental health concerns. I, navigate anxiety or what have you. And that, that was a welcome thing for them to share. I mean, that's not something that I report out. But I think I think the reason that there was some sharing around that was like just trying to normalize that people struggle. It's in a lot of ways, the human condition, right? And I think the pandemic has shown us a lot as it relates to that. But I think because I could empathize, and because I kind of came in as a trusted person, and then I also think, some of them just wanted some advice, or they wanted to like talk to somebody, like somebody listen. So I think for a lot of them it was cathartic and just felt good to share. And it was emotional, but in just a good, like, I care and I'm sad that these things happen to my students kind of way. So that helps. But it was hard, it was hard physically. It taught me a lot about not rushing the data collection, and how emotional and how just exhausting data collection can be. I experienced that before, but I really pushed myself on this one because of the time constraint, and I would have been gentler with myself in hindsight.
You shared, I'm so glad that you shared a summary of the book and your research and your process, because that was one of the things that I had a few, like, I was really interested in just hearing your process behind the development of the text, and why you went with a book versus a series of journal articles. And like you, so my dissertation, I graduated with my PhD in 2021, and so I was doing my dissertation in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and so all my data was collected pre-pandemic. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is that there were all of these adverse mental health characteristics that students were dealing with pre-pandemic, and then you encounter the pandemic, and it's almost like everything is squared or cubed. Things have gotten worse, and folks' mental health, adverse mental health characteristics have possibly increased because of isolation, of work insecurities, of especially with community college students who are possibly adult learners with children, managing work, school life, your kids' lives. And so it's just it's interesting because all the excellent findings that you have, they're so relevant. And then I'm sure if you went back and you did the similar study today, that you'd find similar things, but then you probably find it exacerbated even more. And like yourself, I was so even though I'm a postdoc at Ohio State, I'm also an affiliate, an adjunct faculty at a community college. I teach in the teacher education department. And I never really thought about some of the work that you do with students, just pretty much just being a decent human being. But as work related to counseling, things like letting students have flexible deadlines, because someone, like, I had two in 1 week. I remember I had 2 students who got into car accidents, and like, just not only physical, but the mental toll that takes on you. And then you add on like, oh my gosh, I have all these deadlines for class, I have to do my field placement for my teacher ed class. Yeah, so it's I just really like the way that you talked about like counseling micro credentialing. Um, and my with my background in counseling, it takes a long time to become a licensed counselor. And it is honestly like so impractical to be able to give up pretty much a year of your life to do your clinical internship. It took me it took me 4 semesters because I was working full time. I was a single mom. Like it took me forever to get it done. And there are folks that like I know that would love to become a counselor or social worker or have or gain more skills, but you don't have the luxury of doing that. And in reality, just like so many folks do like the quote diversity work, so many of us do the counseling work through much like through micro credentialing or soft skills that just make us that helping hand, that listening hand. And so that's just really I like the way that you structured it because I've been really thinking about like the direction of higher education and training our next generation of student affairs professionals and knowing that how complicated it is for folks to get a license and then also knowing how there is that big I don't know if you've experienced this but as somebody who worked in an alcohol and drug rehab center and then also at a counseling center at an institution at a college, there is a big disconnect between like counselors and then like a counselor that works with college students because it's just like working with children. It's such a targeted population and there's so many nuances that I feel like some mental health community counselors don't really understand about college. So thank you for that explanation.
Absolutely. I think Emily, it's like so affirming to me to hear you like affirm the things that I've talked about because I don't have that, that training. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a counselor. But I think you're so right. Like within the student affairs literature in particular, and in the literature that bridges sort of the helping skills into what we're doing. There's so much that could be so helpful to faculty, and we just don't think about. There's literature to suggest that community college faculty do a lot of student affairs work, and helping and developing helping skills and thinking about micro counseling that could be so helpful. I mean, just basic like to be candid, faculty are not trained to teach. I mean, you at the community college level, you have the credential. Well, at all levels, you are trained as a chemist, not as a chemistry teacher, and so that all the things that we do in teacher ed to prepare people for K-12 sometimes include this, but that's not a part of the faculty training as a prerequisite. So that's another aside. The other thing that I'm seeing and appreciating so much at the community college level is social workers on campus or people with that kind of a background who can not only some do some of that counseling work, but just are so skillful with the referral work. And then two, kind of seeing these basic needs centers pop up that include supporting students through mental health issues, through food and housing insecurity, through access to healthcare, et cetera, because, living in deep poverty is stressful. And, there are so many elements of mental health concerns that could be solved if people didn't have to struggle with basic needs. So, one of the things that I talk about in the book is we need to look at this through an ecological perspective. It's not, sure, maybe a student is experiencing incredible amounts of anxiety and depression, but it could be because of the way they have to live their lives. No transportation, no reliable childcare, etc. So if we could eliminate some other kinds of boundaries, maybe we could buoy, those, maybe that would be a salve for some of these mental health issues that are just really prevalent. So thank you for that.
And you also talked about like the fact that actually having a diagnosed mental health condition is also a privilege because it takes time that students don't have. It takes like most likely insurance. Also, a lot of folks in university counseling centers, they don't have, because a lot of times they're student trainees, but they don't have that ability to formally diagnose. And then if you want meds, you have to go that additional step and either go to your primary care physician or a psychologist, which takes time. And during the COVID pandemic, we saw so many counseling centers start to outsource their clients or students to community centers or online centers, and that also created another issue because then it's even more disconnect from that college campus, from that sense of belonging. And then those are once again folks that may not understand like the college student population and all this the nuanced concerns that go along with that. And I know one of the things that I do with this classes that I teach is I send out this like pre-class survey, and it has fun things on it. Like I always ask everyone to give me their theme song, and we make a Spotify playlist. But one of the other things I do is I always ask if they have like, if they're going to go, if they have a formal diagnosis and they're going to go and approach like the Office of Accessibility for accommodations, or if there's any undiagnosed things that they'd like me to know, because as a mental health counselor and as somebody who was a counselor at a college, there are so many folks who may meet the criteria of diagnosis, but maybe they don't want to go through it. And like one of my personal beliefs is that I'm actually like rather anti-diagnosis, because I think there's obviously stigma involved, but also, like a lot of people, especially like the Gen Z population, they hold on to these diagnoses. So if I diagnose some student with a major depressive disorder, that's something that they may start looking up their stuff online and say, oh, this is me. In reality, that's just, you may have some characters. I think it's one of those things where I kind of grapple with it, because I understand formal diagnosis for certain reasons, especially like if you need meds or you need an accommodation. But at the same time, once again, the students may not have that privilege, or they may not meet all those check boxes for criteria. Yeah. So I really appreciate that, because I think like there is that difference between like that formal diagnosis and the informal one, but students still may struggle with mental health with that diagnosis or not.
That is such a great point. Like, because when a screen is not a diagnosis, but a screen is still really valuable to understand your student population. Just this idea that we can question the utility of a diagnosis, I think, is wonderful. So thank you for kind of bringing that up. So much to think about here. Thank you, Anna. I see your question in the chat. I don't remember. I don't recall. I want to say not formally, but I don't remember. But there definitely wasn't a basic needs hub, whereas there may have been a food pantry, or of course like referral to services if a student was experiencing housing insecurity or homelessness. But I don't think that there was like a center or even like a centralized website, but I'm sure there was sort of a spattering of those things available, but it was all about referral, I think, at the time. But I don't want to misspeak and give a definitive answer. But I think the concept of the basic needs hub, or sort of like the student care center and student care specialists and those kinds of positions, were not as ubiquitous at the time as we're finding them to be now. And that's because of the pandemic, but I also think that's because of sort of the caring campus movement and some of the work that, has been coming out. And just a note to the good work that has been done by the Hope Center, and colleague Sarah Goldrick-Rab has just been doing a lot of work around these issues, and others, of course, too. But just to highlight what the realities are, and sort of the hashtag Real College, movement, that's really become a part of the consciousness of a lot of institutional leaders right now, which I don't think was as much the case in 2017. But those types of things, we're learning so much more about what we need to do to support our student body, and the things that we just need to do better in order to address, just to make things equitable, which we certainly have a lot of work to do, but at least there's momentum, we're moving in that direction and thinking about equity mindedness.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. The history of the kind of basic needs that sort of has come as a need. I guess I could imagine some of the interviews, the faculty may be feeling hopeless, or that might be the wrong word, but if they're experiencing this and they're seeing what their students are experiencing, and then there's not like a, let me walk you over to this office kind of thing, the sort of like, this is what I'm seeing, but then where do we go to now if there's not sort of a referral on campus? I think it can get really expensive and time consuming, like you said.
And I will say the campus at the time did have like, I'm going to walk you over to a counselor. Like there was that was there. But I think the tension around that was just the feedback loop and issues of privacy and etc., which I understand but at the same time was really disconcerting to a number of faculty, especially if they made this referral. They didn't know if anything happened. The student kept coming back to class. They would go and ask for more information, and then just that wasn't able to be shared, which was just hard, and for some it was kind of like, I'm worried for the student, but also I'm kind of worried for my class and for me, and those types of I mean, and I don't want to sound alarmist, but they just were concerned, and there wasn't that closing of the loop. So it's kind of it was just a source of stress for them. So, okay, I want to be mindful of time. We are at 10:30, but I don't have anything to do. Well, I have plenty to do, but I don't have anything scheduled after this. So maybe just an opportunity for one last comment or question.
So what are your next steps with regards to this specific research interest?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the honest answer is I'm not sure. I want to, here are just a spattering of things. I'm really excited about this new piece that'll come out in 2024 that's specifically like, here's what faculty can do to support students, right? And I kind of talked you through that. And it's funny because, we evolve over time, we learn more, we develop, and sometimes I'm like, I look back at some of the stuff that I've written and I'm like, I don't think that way anymore. So, thinking about what are some of the things in the book that I want to tease out and write more about, that's kind of on my mind. Do I have specifics about that quite yet? No. But I think for right now, what I'm very passionate about this topic and about community college students. And so right now, I kind of just want to get the information about the book. I just want to promote the book, to be honest, not because I want to not for my own self, but just let's think about this. Let's think about this together. And let's try to do better. And let's try to think about how we can help our students and support them better. But, I'm also kind of one who, I have a lot of different research interests and have a lot of different projects in motion. So not exactly sure yet, but I want to kind of just sit in the moment and have conversations with folks about this book, and then kind of take, a few steps at a time, depending on what happens. This conversation has been awesome. And I'm even thinking, Emily, if this is something that you would want to continue discussing, and maybe, there's something that we could do together in the future, I'd be open with that, and things of that nature. So yeah. Anything else, y'all?
I just want to say thank you for your research and for your time. and for talking about the researcher, you as the researcher, sort of the process and the changes and decisions that you made. That's all super helpful.
You're very welcome, Anna. Thank you. And I do kind of take the first chapter of the book to talk about my own experience in kind of a rather interesting way, which I'm not sure how that will land on readers, but I'm interested to see. So I appreciate that. Okay. Well, I'm gonna stop.
Yes, I'd love to connect. I would love to connect with you at some point too, especially after I take a look at this textbook, and I'm going to share it with my department chair at it's Owens Community College. It's a small community college in Northwest Ohio, but she and I both have like backgrounds in like counseling, and we were both advisors, academic advisors, in our previous lives, and I think there's a lot of it seems like there's a lot of really relevant information. So thank you for this work.
Yeah, of course. Let me stop the recording, and then, but if you all wouldn't mind to just